KP.
KPC.
News.
Information.
Culture.
KPCC.
California sensibility.
Hey, I'm Amy Choi.
And I'm Rebecca Lehrer, and we are the Mashup Americans.
Rebecca, today I would like to talk about facts.
Okay, great. So, like, The Facts of Life, my favorite TV show? Or like facts like the birds and the bees and that's how babies are made?
Well, I love talking about all of those things, but more like there are facts in the world, despite some people attempting to create a post-fact world. For example, fact, vaccines save lives.
Oh, okay. Those kinds of facts. Got it. So, like, fact, climate change is real and it is caused by human behavior.
Yes. And fact, protecting the environment also means protecting things like our drinking water and our air. And the fact that we need both of those things to survive. Also, if the air is terrible for one person, it's probably soon to get terrible for all people. Another fact, these are all shared resources.
So we know that sometimes that's hard to accept, this idea of shared resources, which is kind of understandable because depending on where we live and what we have access to, we make a lot of assumptions about what we should expect every day as just a basic part of our lives. Speaking of which, just going to take a water break and drink some clean water.
Delicious water.
So good. So like this may seem obvious, but when I'm home in Los Angeles, I assume I will always be able to drink from the tap. But when I go visit my family in El Salvador, right, the water safety is questionable. I drink filtered water there, but not everyone can access filtered water. Duh. And that has a ton of downstream effects.
Right. And I think, we tend to think that when there's a scarcity of resources and that is true for people in other places or in other countries, like that's somehow okay, which of course it's not. And of course, this is also happening in the U.S. Like just look at Flint. And I think what we can all agree on is that it's a moral fact that everybody deserves to drink clean water and breathe clean air. We don't all get to. However, we all can be part of the fight to help make that happen.
Speaking of fighters, today we are talking to Rhea Suh, president of the National Resources Defense Council, which is the leading environmental action group in the U.S. If you're not familiar with them, they're basically the ACLU for the environment. So because she's such a badass and fighting so hard, I wonder, Amy, who do you think will play Rhea in the Erin Brockovich-style movie of her life?
Such a good question, because I don't think it's going to be Julia Roberts. Not that Rhea doesn't deserve Julia Roberts, but I don't think that Julia has the right skin tone, maybe, because Rhea is also a first-generation Korean American mashup, grew up in Boulder, Colorado. Don't worry, guys. Rebecca's here to make sure that things don't get too Korean on the show, which honestly, I mean, that's a risk we take when Mashup does basically anything.
Right. That's just another fact, you guys. So with that, on to the show. It's Rhea, not Rhea. Is that correct? Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yes, you are pronouncing it correctly.
I have a Greek friend named Rhea, so
I'm chuckling because my last name and my first name are I've mispronounced both of them for most of my life. So it is a Greek name, so the proper Greek pronunciation is Rhea, but I say Rhea, and then my last name is Suh. But I grew up in Colorado, where after probably a decade of trying to get people to actually just say our name in exactly the way it's spelled, we just were like, okay, whatever, Sue's fine. So it should be Rhea Suh.
I feel you, because there were definitely like years of my life where white people would tell me that it's Che, not Choi. And I was like, listen, I know that in Korea it's different.
Yeah.
But we're here, and this is what my dad decided in 1974. So this is what we're doing.
No, I know. So what did your parents?
It's Choi.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Rhea Suh, how do you mash up?
I'm a Korean American. I'm an environmentalist and I'm a patriot. I'm a mother and I'm an executive. I think in a more of a deeper sense, the fact that I am, a child of immigrants and I was raised with a very clear understanding of the sacrifices that were made by my parents and their parents before them, and a set of responsibilities about what that meant for me in terms of my life and my decisions. It's in large part why I chose the career that I chose. I've actually always been in public service, and I think it really is just this sense that was ingrained in me from a very, very young age that it was my responsibility to pursue that dream, and that dream wasn't going to materialize without a lot of work. And from my angle, again, working primarily in the public sector my entire life in government, the American dream doesn't happen by happenstance. It happens because all of us work to perfect it every single day. Right. So really investing in the reality that a lot of what I think makes America great, and frankly, a lot of the things that we feel particularly challenged about now with this new administration, it's very clear that we have to fight for them. We can't accept the fact that these are things that we have believed were status quo, or have believed were our rights, or have believed were the social norms in our country. These are things that every day we have to stand up and again fight for.
And that's something that has been a big shift for us, is that in the years that we've been doing this work with Mashup America, I think we started with the idea that this was a celebration again, and in the past 6 months, it's become a cause.
Yeah.
It's the same work. And we like to think like we now have just more knowledge about the marketplace that we're in and the ideas that people have. But so your immigrant background has really shaped your vision of of America, how much you work for it, your kind of responsibility to fulfill those dreams and to serve. How has your Koreanness impacted your relationship to nature and to the environment that kind of took on the direction or the field that you were going to be working in?
Again, my experience of being Korean is in the unique situation of being a Korean within America. Quite frankly, when I was growing up, I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. A lot of the reason why I think I'm an environmentalist is that I had this just beautiful tapestry as my backyard. And my parents and my sisters and I would often spend a lot of time in the outdoors. And so having barbecues or having picnics or doing hikes and, getting out the barbecue pan and making galbi on the banks of the rivers that were floating by, that was as natural to me as, strapping on a pair of skis. So
and that sounds so beautiful.
That's the only. I just want to be clear. That's the only kind of camping I'm willing to do.
When somebody's making galbi on
Troop
the side.
Beverly Hills over here.
Well,
I'm going to your galbi camping party. None of this crap with the beans
I know.
in the cans.
Forget about the freeze-dried food. I thought camping food was gimbap, right? So
of course.
tell me that it's not, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be a camper anymore.
There's also, I think, that intangible sense of magic or sparking the imagination. How is a kid changed by seeing a butterfly? Like, what was your first memory of that magic, of that seeing a butterfly? Or
I'm not sure if it was my first memory, but I have a very strong memory of being in the Rocky Mountains, and I was actually working as a volunteer building a trail on the Continental Divide. So I was in...
I like how casual you say that. I was just volunteering in the Rocky Mountains, building a trail on the Continental Divide.
It was an interesting experience. I will say it was more dirty than I have ever been in my entire life, but it was pretty remarkable. And I think the moment that sticks with me from that 5-6 week experience was that I did a hike by myself kind of at dusk one day. I was probably 13,000 feet in this kind of area of the forest by myself. And I heard this kind of thumping noise, and I just started freaking out. I was like, oh my God, is there like an animal? Is there somebody following me?
Right.
And it literally took me 2 or 3 minutes to realize that it was the beating of my own heart, that I had never actually been in a place where it was so still and so quiet that you could hear your own heartbeat. Being able to kind of have those experiences in the wild, they are transformative.
There are many stories, I think, about, what it means to be a person of color outdoors and what it means to have like a Black body outside, or how in America the idea of being active in the environment or being an avid outdoors person or even just loving the experience of being there, that's for white people that shop at REI.
Yeah.
Was that something that permeated your brain?
Absolutely.
I mean, you did live in Boulder. Let's talk about that.
I did live in Boulder, and Boulder at that time, and I think probably still today, is pretty white.
Yeah.
And I think the architect of what most people think of environmentalists, it is the Patagonia-clad outdoors person that is more than often a white person. And I feel like I've been eschewing that kind of my whole career in the environmental space, both from the perspective of literally people saying to me, and this wasn't that long ago in my career, like, you just don't look the type, right? You can't really work on Western public lands because you don't have that big belt buckle and you don't have the cowboy boots and you're not white, or, you're not the kind of, again, you're not the kind of typical person that is going to be behind the counter at a Patagonia store. I think that's just really,
no shade to Patagonia. They do great work.
it's a fantastic
Yes.
company. But I really do think that, frankly, it's a label that in many ways really undermines what the environmental movement's actually all about. And it's, again, a label that I've personally been trying to issue, but a label that I feel the environmental community needs to do a better job issuing, really defining the work that we do in the movement as work that is on behalf of all of us. So it doesn't matter whether we recreate in the greatest national parks in the country, or if you're just a mother trying to take care of your kids and give them glasses of water. The environment affects us all, and I think if you boil it down to the very basic rights and standards and values that we have as Americans, you are able to kind of really truly see the essence of why the environmental movement began, the essence of why the environmental movement is so critical today. It is really about these common values, but it's also about these basic rights. So is it our basic right to turn on our faucets and put a glass of water underneath them and drink the water without fear that that water is going to be poisoned? Most people in this country think it's their right? Is it our right to go out and not be choked in smog in whatever city that we live in this country? I mean, the reality of the fabric of environmental laws that we have in this country, they're meant to protect us all. They're meant to protect that basic right that's afforded by all of us. Now, back to this question of, how the environmental movement's perceived, I do think there's more and greater opportunity for us collectively to be laying out the more basic case for why environmentalism matters. And frankly, there's also a lot more opportunity and need for the environmental community itself to really start to diversify from within.
Right. That intersection of environmentalism and social justice. Is that something that it seems to be emerging more in the mainstream conversation? I think because recently, more like if you look at Flint, it's like people suddenly are like, what, you can't just drink the water?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like obviously linked to systemic racism and poverty and this and that. And it's not just like, oh, you should recycle.
I mean, I agree with you. I think that the intersections between social justice, equity, environmental justice, and general environmental kind of issues are becoming more and more clear, unfortunately, because there are more and more examples of where we are basically depriving people of basic human rights because of our inability to either maintain or enforce the laws that are on the books. Flint's obviously a great example of how that system has broken down and failed a community of 100,000 people, low income, a lot of communities of color there. But it's not the only example.
Right.
And I think the thing that we all collectively need to realize is that systemic systemic racism and environmental injustice has been connected for basically time immemorial in this country. And there are communities that have borne a larger burden of environmental toxicity through our history, and pointing a spotlight to that, the environmental community taking a greater responsibility around trying to fight for that, so that it's not just simply let's protect the beautiful areas, but let's protect all people for this basic right we believe is, again, uniquely American. While it may seem ludicrous that we're in a situation where we would have to rely on bottled water, where government wouldn't necessarily regulate any of the commons that we all rely and are dependent upon, that's unfortunately the world that we're moving into.
I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's like not like Republicans get to breathe different air.
Yeah.
Like we all walk around in the same place.
Hola! Please give us 5 estrellas on iTunes. It helps people find us, and it also makes us feel really good. iTunes.com/mashup, 5 estrellas. Gracias. Bye.
It wasn't easy, but nothing is.
So to not be dense, but to be dense, there are so many facts that point towards it. And I assume there's some kind of immediate business case for denying climate change, but I wonder, why are people denying climate change?
Well, Rebecca, I think that your earlier point that there is, I think, a business challenge to climate change that, quite frankly, is probably the leading edge of why we've seen as much resistance to the progress that we need to make as a country and as a world. But beyond the business case, I think it's really important to understand that the larger narrative that has now been spun around climate for the past 20 years includes a narrative around, and the seeds around, the role, shape, scope, size of government. Do we really trust government? Is government there for us or against us? Who are these government scientists that are making these projections and these decisions? It's the seeds of doubt that I think have really blossomed into this colossal denial apparatus that not only prevents us from achieving the kinds of action that we need on climate, but is frankly preventing us from seeing the kind of government for the people, by the people that we all, I think, thought we deserved or expected or is required. And so I think it's broader than just what's happening on the climate front from a business angle of the businesses that frankly are going to have impact on their bottom line because they're fossil fuel producing companies and fossil fuels are a contributor to climate change. It's unfortunately a little bit more complicated than that.
Denial apparatus.
Yeah, and also short-sighted. What have you noticed or learned about kind of different cultural approaches to the environment and environmentalism?
So I think in general, in most other countries, there is much more of an obvious intersection between human rights and environmental issues than there have been in this country. And again, I think we're now facing a point in our history and reality where we're going to see that intersection played out in a lot more concrete ways. And again, I think that intersection of democracy, of people's rights, of human rights, of environmental rights, you see that much more viscerally, visibly in lots of other places aside from the United States. But again, things are changing.
What's one thing that every individual can actually do specifically to help improve the environment? Like, is it not buying products from certain corporation, or is it not flushing our toilets?
Or is it like not buying clothes for a year?
Yeah.
Or, it's something where, like, especially if you want to be educated, you take in a lot of information. You're like, everything I do is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
and then you don't do anything.
Right.
No, so I actually think that this is a super interesting conversation because so many of the kind of ideas that you've just thrown out there are around kind of prohibitions, right? They're around the sense of like, I should not do something, or I should constrain myself in some way, or it's a sacrifice. And I think certainly there are ways for, again, all of us to make wiser choices, but that those choices don't necessarily mean sacrifice, right? It's not that we're going to go hungry just because we don't kind of get a smorgasbord in every meal, right? So it's less about how do I deprive myself of something, but how do I live a life that's simpler, and how do I live a life that's richer with meaning? And, if I'm going to have a splurge, I'm going to splurge on something that I can really value as opposed to something that's disposable. I would like to say that I think the most important thing that anybody who cares about the environment, whether you've thought about it a lot, whether you consider yourself an environmentalist, given the reality of not only what we're facing with climate change, but what we're facing politically with the real attacks on the basic framework of the environmental laws that we have in this country, is get active. Now is the time to get active. And you don't have to. Again, I hate to bring up Patagonia because they're such a great company. You don't have to have a Patagonia jacket to go out there and protest with us, right?
Or
you
a
don't
Columbia
have
jacket
to,
or REI.
right? Like this, no matter where you live, what you look like, how much money you make, right? It is your right as an American to have both the heritage that we have in our public resources as Americans and the rights that are indoctrinated in the statutes that we've created to have clean air and clean water. I think most people agree with that, whether they're Republican or Democratic.
Right.
And the unfortunate reality is that those very things are threatened. So how can you get active, whether it's in your local set of opportunities or in national sets of opportunities? There's never been, I think, more of an exciting time to coming. So it's not simply let's repeal the things that we didn't agree with from the Obama administration. It's not simply, the entire world, literally, I think even North Korea signed on to the Paris agreements, and now we're the outlier saying we don't believe in climate change.
I mean, that's never a good
so
thing.
It's not
North
just,
Korea seems more reasonable than we do.
No, I know, kind of shocking. So it's not just those things. It's that they're actually going after the underlying statutes that were created basically when I was born in the 70s, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Endangered Species Act. All of these acts are regulatory in nature, and they're going after regulation. I mean, he just signed an executive order, and it's completely characteristic of his style, but his executive order said for every new regulation the government puts in place, we're going to get rid of 2. It's just absurd to think about, so what 2? Are we going to care less about children's health and less about drinking water standards because we want to implement something around air quality standards? I mean, it just is nonsensical. It's not a rational, scientific data kind of or analytical approach to thinking through policy. It's not an approach to thinking through the obligations that government has around public health. And it's not an approach, frankly, to thinking about government's responsibility for the public trust, right? So the public trust isn't just our democracy. The public trust are the commons that we all uniquely depend upon. So who's going to take responsibility for that? As we've seen in other countries and as we've seen prior to the advent of these laws in our own country, when you leave it up to corporate interests, the bottom line doesn't necessarily take care of those common interests.
Right.
So I do think that is the biggest single threat that we are facing right now, and it's a pretty systemic threat.
How do you keep your courage, or where do you find your courage? Because I think on the surface, Donald Trump is the biggest threat to the environment and the biggest challenge we have to maintain the public trust in these common grounds. You're a woman, you're identifies, from an immigrant background, you're a person of color, and you're an activist. You're being attacked from all these levels from this threat. How do you stay brave?
That's a really good question. I don't actually consider myself a fearless person. I think I have kind of the same vulnerabilities as everybody else. I think it's more that I believe so strongly in my convictions, and I believe that they're not just my convictions or the convictions of my organization. I believe that they're convictions that transcend us as a country, us as a people, us, as Democrats and as Republicans. These are basic rights, and I'm not fearful about speaking up on behalf of that. I think it's not only common sense. I think it's unfortunately exactly what's required for the moment. And so as much common sense as I can speak to the crazy rhetoric that we're seeing, I'm happy to be the conduit to do that. I feel like it's not just a responsibility. It's like a real conviction and set of values that I believe strongly in, and I believe strongly, again, most people share.
Pretty badass. We're ready to like follow you into battle.
I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm in.
we're in.
I mean, okay, so a few more questions. We understand, and I'll say this as the only non-Korean in this conversation, but that Koreans have an obsession with protecting their skin.
That's a true story.
And we, in fact, we have our own article on our site that Amy put together, which is a guide to Korean skincare for non-Koreans.
It's very confusing. There's a lot
Do
of
you
steps.
do to protect your skin from the sun, given how much time you spend outdoors?
Well, I am probably the worst Korean to ask that question of.
But I'm looking at you and you have flawless skin.
No. So I grew up in Colorado, and I was just similar to lots of kids. Like I hated the sunscreen moment, and then now as mothers, we're just like, oh my god, can you just stick that sunscreen on your face? So lots of really bad SPF rays hitting my face all the time. So I did
altitude.
not, and at altitude, so it's even worse up there. But I did not, I think, have a very good skincare regimen.
Do you do the beekeeper thing now? That's what my husband calls it. He's like, when are you going to go full Ajumma with the beekeeper and the veil?
I do not do the beekeeper. I swear to God, I get the over-the-counter oil of Olay that's combination moisturizer and sunscreen. I'm putting my Korean sisters to shame right now. I am so sorry.
Seriously.
And I
I'm
probably
sorry.
should read that guide that's on your website because I could learn a lot.
We will send it to you. The
Yeah.
aunties are pissed right now.
I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
okay.
sorry. Miane.
Wait, so, okay.
What is your Bubba Meiser?
So I have this really weird fear of whistling at night because my mom once told me that in Korea, whistling at night would kind of conjure the spirits, right? Like that it was like a call to the ghosts. And so literally, she told me that when I was 3 years old, and I'm still freaked out. I'm almost 47 years old and I'm still freaked out about whistling at night. So whether that's a real thing or whether that was something that my mom just told me to get me to shut up, I'm not sure, but gosh darn it, I'm not ever going to whistle at night. I'm still scared.
My mom had a cats turn into the spirits at night. That's why that we could never have a cat. And then also that when you have the big 20-pound bag of rice, that when you scooped out the 2 cups or whatever that you were making for the dinner, for the meal, that you always had to, when you put the cup back into the rice bag, that it had to be full. Otherwise you would run out of luck. You always had to have a full cup in your rice bag. And I was like, it kind of makes sense, but
I know.
That's how luck works, you guys.
Well, unfortunately, now you've told me that story, and I will forever be paranoid.
I know, that's
about
a
making
thing.
sure that little cup in my rice bag is totally full.
you're welcome, Rhea.
I mean, this was a super fun interview, and thank you for having me.
Of
Really,
course.
this is great.
Thank you.
Don't wanna be an American idiot. Don't want a nation under the new media.
So I am now super pumped to fight this climate change denying inhumane demon who doesn't seem to believe that everybody deserves the right to breathe air and drink water.
Yes, we can.
Si se puede.
Si se puede. And also, I think I probably need to get rid of my Volkswagen diesel car, which apparently is polluting the earth.
Yeah,
On a
let's get
personal
on that.
note, yeah. So you can become a member of the NRDC, the National Resources Defense Council, at nrdc.org. Also, if you want to follow Rhea Suh on the socials, in addition to following her into battle against the climate change deniers, she's on Twitter and Insta at Rhea Suh, which is RHEASUH.
Remember, it's Rhea, not Rhea.
And Suh, not so. The Mashup Americans are me, Rebecca Lehrer.
And me, Amy Choi. Our producer today was Jocelyn Gonzalez. Our show is produced by American Public Media and Southern California Public Radio, KPCC.
We're also supported in part by an award from the National Endowment for the Arts on the web at arts.gov.
Let's get outside today.
Okay, bye. Going outside.
Television